He let the homeless girl stay in his barn. Years later, she returned in a private jet. Welcome to Dusk Tales. Let's uncover what really happened. The wind howled through the desolate canyons of Elias Vance's ranch, a lonely lament that echoed the emptiness in his soul. For 15 years since the day his wife, Eleanor, had been taken by a swift, merciless illness, Elias had existed in a state of quiet, self-imposed exile. His ranch, a sprawling expanse of unforgiving land under an indifferent sky, was his fortress and his prison. He was a man etched into the very landscape, weathered, stoic, and profoundly solitary. His days were a long, monotonous rhythm of mending fences, tending to his small herd of cattle, and watching the horizon, waiting for nothing, expecting nothing. His only companion was Rusty, his grizzled border collie, a faithful shadow whose silent presence was more comforting than any human voice. Elias communicated more through quiet gestures and shared glances with his dog than with the few souls he encountered in the nearest town of Havenwood, 20 miles away. Havenwood was a place he visited only for the barest necessities, a small, dusty outpost that, despite its name, offered little solace. Its main street, lined with faded storefronts and populated by faces that seemed to carry the weight of generations of hardship, held no appeal for him. He preferred the raw, untamed wilderness of his land, the vast, silent stretches of open sky, the company of the wind and the whispering pines. It was a bleak existence, perhaps, but it was his, and he had carved out a grudging peace within its confines. He had built his world on the bedrock of self-reliance, a hard-won independence that sometimes felt more like a stubborn refusal to accept anything beyond his own capabilities. He knew the rhythms of the land intimately, reading the subtle signs of changing weather in the clouds, understanding the needs of his animals with an almost instinctual empathy. He was a man of few words, but every action was deliberate, every decision weighed with a quiet, practiced wisdom. His grief for Eleanor was a deep, unshakable foundation beneath his stoic exterior, a constant ache that had shaped him, transforming him from a man who once laughed freely into a silent sentinel of the land. He hadn't sought out this solitude. It had simply settled over him, a heavy mantle, after Eleanor was gone. He had lost his spark, his reason for reaching beyond his own fences. He was simply existing, marking time, fulfilling his duties, waiting for the day his own time would come to an end, joining Eleanor in the quiet earth he tended. But peace, like everything else in Elias's life, was often an illusion, especially when the relentless, unseasonal rains began. For 3 days, the sky had wept a ceaseless, cold drizzle, turning the normally parched earth into a treacherous, sucking quagmire. The creeks, usually lazy trickles, had swelled into raging, muddy torrents, threatening to breach their banks and tear through his old fence lines. It was a duty Elias couldn't shirk. His cattle depended on those fences, and his livelihood depended on his cattle. The very ground he stood on, the inheritance he worked to preserve, was now at risk from the churning waters. The roar of Willow Creek, usually a gentle lullaby, had become a furious, aggressive symphony, a constant reminder of the raw, untamed power of nature. With a worn oilskin slicker pulled tight against the biting wind and a trusty coil of barbed wire slung over his shoulder, Elias mounted his sturdy quarter horse, Buck. Rusty, sensing the urgency in his master's posture, trotted faithfully at his heels, his tail a low, rhythmic thump against the mud-splattered ground. The ride to the western fence line, bordering Willow Creek, was long and arduous. Buck picked his way carefully through the slick, treacherous mud, his hooves sinking deep with every step, his powerful muscles straining against the boggy earth. The rain lashed at Elias's face, stinging his eyes, blurring his vision, but he pushed on, driven by the ingrained sense of responsibility that was the last remaining anchor in his life. He was a man of routine, of duty, and even in his isolation, he held himself to an unyielding standard. He would not let his land, or his livestock, suffer due to his neglect. As they approached Willow Creek, its roar now a deafening symphony of rushing water and tumbling debris, Elias felt a prickle of unease that had nothing to do with the storm. It was a subtle shift in the oppressive quiet, a presence that disturbed the desolate peace of the wilderness. Rusty, usually stoic, let out a low, guttural growl, his hackles rising, his gaze fixed on a cluster of gnarled juniper trees that clung precariously to the creek bank. His fur bristled, and a low, continuous rumble emanated from his chest, a sound Elias knew well. A warning, a sign of something profoundly wrong. Elias pulled Buck to a halt, his hand instinctively going to the rifle scabbard on his saddle. He was a man who knew the land and its dangers intimately, every rustle, every shadow. A bear? A coyote too bold? A mountain lion, driven down by the relentless rain? But Rusty's growl was different, more wary than aggressive, less about a direct threat and more about a deep, unsettling unease. It was the sound of a dog sensing something profoundly, unnervingly out of place, something human. He dismounted, handing Buck's reins to a low-hanging branch, his boots sinking into the saturated earth. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, his voice rough with disuse, a quiet command. He followed Rusty's unwavering gaze, pushing through the dripping undergrowth, the wet branches slapping against his face, the cold seeping into his bones. The junipers, their branches thick and tangled, offered a natural, secluded alcove, almost entirely hidden from view, a place where a desperate creature might seek shelter. And there, huddled in the darkest corner, shivering uncontrollably, was a shape. A small shape, wrapped in what looked like a threadbare, soiled blanket, barely discernible against the damp earth and the shadows. A human shape. A child. A profound shock, cold and sharp, pierced through Elias's carefully constructed shell of indifference, shattering the hardened layers of his grief. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the storm. He moved closer, his steps cautious, his eyes straining through the gloom, trying to make sense of the impossible sight before him. It was a girl, a young girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, her face barely visible beneath a tangled mass of dark, matted hair. Her clothes were soaked through, clinging to her emaciated frame, and her skin, where it was visible, was a pale, bluish white, tinged with purple. Her lips were cracked, her small body trembling uncontrollably, not just from the cold, but from a deep, pervasive fear that vibrated through the air. She was clearly hypothermic, shivering violently, her teeth chattering so hard they sounded like tiny castanets in the overwhelming silence of the wilderness. Her eyes, when she finally looked up at him, were wide and terrified, reflecting the wildness of a cornered animal, a silent plea for mercy. They were the color of the stormy sky, a deep, unsettling blue, filled with a primal, desperate fear that spoke of unspeakable things, of profound cruelty and abandonment. She didn't cry out. She didn't speak. She just stared at him, her gaze a desperate plea, a silent, primal plea for warmth, for safety, for anything that wasn't the cold, relentless indifference of the storm. Elias felt a surge of something he hadn't experienced in years, a raw, aching compassion that cut through the layers of his self-imposed numbness, bypassing his cynicism, hitting him with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a problem. This was a living, breathing testament to the cruelty of the world, a fragile life clinging to the edge of existence. And for the first time in a long time, Elias Vance, the lonely rancher, felt a spark of indignant outrage ignite within him, hot and sharp, burning away the years of stoic detachment. Who could abandon a child like this? What kind of monster would leave such a fragile creature to face the elements, to die in the cold, unforgiving wilderness? The question screamed in his head, unanswerable and infuriating, a direct challenge to the solitary peace he had so carefully cultivated. He knelt beside her, slowly, deliberately, trying not to startle her further, his movements practiced from years of approaching skittish animals. He peeled off his own heavy oilskin slicker, its warmth radiating from his body, and gently draped it over her shivering frame. She flinched at his touch, but didn't pull away, her eyes still locked on his, a mixture of terror and a nascent, desperate hope flickering in their depths, like a tiny candle flame in a vast, dark cavern. He saw the fresh, angry bruises on her small, exposed arms, the raw, chafed skin around her wrists, as if she had been bound. He saw the grime under her fingernails, the cuts and scrapes on her bare feet. This wasn't just neglect. This was active, deliberate abuse, a brutal act of dehumanization. The indignation solidified into a grim, unshakable resolve. He wouldn't just take her to his cabin. He would protect her. He would find out who had done this. He would find justice. The silence of the wilderness, once his solace, now felt heavy with unspoken promises, with a new, terrifying purpose. This was not merely a discovery. It was an incision, cutting deep into his carefully constructed wall of indifference, exposing the raw, aching core of his humanity. He had found her, and in doing so, he had, unexpectedly, found himself. His solitary life was over. The universe had just delivered him a desperate, vulnerable soul, and Elias Vance, the man who had stopped caring, knew, with a chilling certainty, that he had to fight. Elias lifted the girl gently into his arms. She was shockingly light, a fragile bundle of bones and cold flesh, her small body trembling violently even under the warmth of his slicker. Her head lolled against his shoulder, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps, each one a desperate struggle. He carried her back to Buck, carefully mounting the horse, cradling her in front of him, protecting her from the biting wind as best he could, shielding her fragile form against the harsh elements. Rusty whined, his nose nudging her hand, sensing the urgency and the distress, his eyes reflecting the concern in Elias's own. The ride back to the cabin was a desperate race against time. Buck, sensing his master's urgency, moved with uncharacteristic speed through the thick mud, his powerful legs churning, splashing through the puddles, his hooves pounding a relentless rhythm against the sodden earth. The rhythmic thud of Buck's hooves became a desperate mantra in Elias's ears. Hold on. Just hold on. Hold on. He thought of Eleanor, of her boundless compassion, her gentle hands, how she would have known exactly what to do, what comforting words to say, what specific remedies to apply. She would have known how to comfort this broken child, how to coax life back into her frozen limbs. He was a man of a land, of hard labor and stoic silence, not of gentle care or nurturing touch. But he would try. He would do everything he could, every ounce of his ingrained practicality and hidden tenderness dedicated to this fragile life. Back at the cabin, Elias worked with a frantic, uncharacteristic speed. He stripped the girl of her wet, threadbare clothes, his hands moving with surprising gentleness, and wrapped her in thick, dry blankets he pulled from his cedar chest, still smelling faintly of lavender. He lit a roaring fire in the hearth, feeding it with dry kindling until the small cabin was filled with warmth and flickering light, chasing away the pervasive damp and cold. He heated water on the old wood-burning stove, then, remembering his grandmother's remedies for shock, mixed a spoonful of honey into a mug of lukewarm chamomile tea. He knelt by her side, pressing the warm mug against her still-cold lips, coaxing her to sip a few drops at a time. She stirred, a faint moan escaping her lips, her eyes fluttering open briefly before closing again. Her dark lashes were long and wet against her pale cheeks. Her face, though drawn with exhaustion, was unmarred by any serious injury beyond the rope burns and the faint, almost imperceptible bruising around her neck. As the warmth slowly seeped into her small body, her shivering began to subside, replaced by a deep, fitful sleep. Elias sat beside her, watching her breathe, the rhythmic rise and fall of her chest a testament to her fragile hold on life. He covered her with another blanket, then turned his gaze to the roaring fire, his mind filled with questions that demanded answers. Who was she? What had happened to her? And who, in this quiet, forgotten valley, harbored such a deep, burning cruelty that they would abandon a child to die in the wilderness. The thought of contacting the authorities, the local sheriff in Havenwood, brought a familiar sense of dread. Sheriff Brody was a good old boy, more concerned with keeping the peace. And by peace, he meant keeping the town's power brokers happy, than with digging into uncomfortable truths. Elias knew that if he brought the girl to Brody, she would likely be funneled into the state's foster care system, a system he had heard dark whispers about, a system notorious for its bureaucracy, its neglect, and its tendency to shuffle children from one temporary, often unstable, home to another. He pictured the cold, impersonal offices, the social workers whose faces were etched with a weariness that bordered on apathy, the distant, detached officials who saw children as case numbers, not as fragile, traumatized souls. He imagined her being asked probing questions by strangers, shuffled through interviews, her already fractured sense of safety further shattered. He thought of her terrified eyes when he had first found her, the raw, primal fear that had nothing to do with the storm and everything to do with people. No, he couldn't. Not yet. Not until he knew more. Not until he could ensure her safety. He would wait. He would give her time to heal, time to trust. He would protect her himself for now. It was a dangerous decision, a reckless one, stepping outside the bounds of the law to harbor an unknown child. It could lead to accusations of kidnapping, to legal battles, to losing his ranch, his entire life. But looking at her small, innocent face, so vulnerable in sleep, he knew he had no other choice. His heart, long hardened by grief, felt a surprising, fierce protectiveness. He was a lone wolf, but he would defend this cub with everything he had. As the hours passed, and the rain slowly subsided, the cabin settled into a rhythm of quiet breathing and the crackle of the fire. Elias, rifle across his lap, watched over her, a silent guardian in the dim light. He felt a profound shift within him. The loneliness that had been his constant companion for so long had been pushed aside, replaced by a new, terrifying, yet strangely comforting burden of responsibility. He was no longer just Elias Vance, the hermit rancher. He was a protector, and the world outside, the world of callousness and cruelty that had abandoned this child, was now his enemy. The battle for this girl's safety and for a deeper justice had only just begun. The next morning, the sun broke through the clouds, painting the cabin's small window in a soft, watery light. The air was crisp, washed clean by the rain, and for the first time in days, the roar of Willow Creek had softened to a gentle murmur. Elias watched the girl stir, her eyes fluttering open, now clear and wide, their stormy blue reflecting the morning light. She looked directly at him, and for the first time, the primal fear in her gaze had receded, replaced by a hesitant curiosity, a dawning awareness of her surroundings. She looked at the warm blankets, the fire, the old dog, Rusty, who had padded over and now rested his head on her makeshift bed, his eyes soft and gentle. "Good morning, child," Elias said, his voice rough from disuse, but infused with a desperate gentleness. "How do you feel?" She stared at him, her small brow furrowed. After a long moment, she slowly sat up, pushing the blankets away, her movements stiff. She looked down at her hands, then at her bandaged wrists, her eyes clouded with memory. "My name is Lena," she whispered, her voice a small, reedy sound, barely audible. "Lena," Elias repeated the name, a sense of profound relief washing over him. "A name, a connection. It's a good name, Lena. My name is Elias. This is Rusty." He gestured to the dog, who gave a soft thump of his tail. Lena reached out a hesitant hand and tentatively stroked Rusty's head. The dog licked her fingers, and a tiny, fleeting smile touched Lena's lips, the first Elias had seen. It was a fragile thing, but it was there, a glimmer of light in the overwhelming darkness of her past. Elias cooked her a simple breakfast, warm oatmeal with a spoonful of the local honey he harvested from his own hives and a mug of hot milk. Lena ate slowly, hesitantly at first, but with a growing appetite, her small body absorbing the much-needed warmth and sustenance. As she ate, her color began to return, and some of the haunted look in her eyes softened. Elias watched her, a quiet gratitude in his chest. She was resilient, stronger than he might have first assumed. As she finished, she looked up at him, her eyes serious. "They hurt me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "My aunt and her friend, they made me work. They said I was useless. I was a burden. Then one night, she threw me out, said she couldn't feed another mouth. Her friend, he got angry when I cried. He dragged me out to the barn. He tied me up. He said I belonged to them now. He said if I ever came back, they would teach me a lesson I'd never forget." The words were a fresh stab of indignation for Elias. Not merely abandonment, but systematic abuse. Forced labor. The utter callousness of it all sent a fresh wave of sick rage through him. His earlier instincts about the state system now felt profoundly validated. There was no way he was turning her over to be potentially sent back into a situation like that, or worse. He looked at her, his jaw tight. "You're safe here, Lena," he said, his voice firm, unwavering. "No one will hurt you. You're not a burden. You're a brave girl." Lena nodded, her eyes still holding a deep, lingering fear. "I just want to be safe," she whispered. Elias listened, his mind already formulating a grim strategy. He couldn't keep her here forever. His ranch was remote, but not entirely off the grid. And the local authorities, spurred by a missing child report from the foster system, would eventually come looking. He needed information. He needed to understand the system she had fled from. He needed to find a way to protect her, truly protect her, not just temporarily hide her. The thought of contacting his old lawyer, a shrewd but expensive man named Franklin, who worked out of the city, crossed his mind. But that would cost money he didn't have and draw attention he couldn't afford. He would have to rely on his own wits, his own resources. He told Lena to rest, promising her safety. He sat by the fire, mulling over his options. He remembered whispers he'd heard years ago about a new state-run foster care initiative, supposedly designed to place children in rural areas, away from the city's corrupting influences. He also remembered the name of a specific social worker, a Ms. Harriet Thorne, who had a reputation for being ruthless, efficient, and utterly devoid of empathy, known for her no-nonsense approach to problem children. He had heard stories of children under her care being shuffled through dozens of homes, ending up in worse situations than they started. A cold dread settled in his stomach. If Lena fell into Thorne's hands, she would be just another case number, another statistical anomaly. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that the battle for Lena's safety would not be fought with brute force, but with cunning, with careful planning, against a system that was designed to chew up and spit out the vulnerable. He had to be smarter. He had to be faster. He had to become the wolf to protect his cub. His solitary life was well and truly over. Elias knew he was walking a tightrope. Keeping Lena hidden was a grave legal risk, but surrendering her to a system that had already failed her felt like a betrayal he couldn't countenance. He spent the next few days in a state of heightened vigilance, his senses sharpened by a protectiveness he hadn't known he possessed. Lena remained largely within the confines of the cabin, helping him with small chores, her quiet presence a strange comfort in his once empty home. She started to draw intricate, haunting sketches of forests and animals, her artistic talent a surprising glimpse into her inner world. She also revealed more fragments of her past, a vague memory of her birth parents, long dead or vanished, and a childhood spent drifting through various, equally neglectful, foster homes before ending up with her cruel aunt. The friend who had tied her up was the aunt's live-in boyfriend, a man known for his temper. Elias tried to gather information about the state's foster care system and Ms. Harriet Thorne through discreet channels in Havenwood, careful not to draw attention. He'd make calls from public phones, asking vague questions, pretending to be a concerned, distant relative. What he learned confirmed his worst fears. Ms. Thorne was indeed a force to be reckoned with, a formidable bureaucrat who prioritized statistics and compliance over compassion. She was known for her stern methods, often placing children in group homes or with distant, reluctant relatives, rather than seeking out genuine, loving environments. Whispers circulated about her influence, her seemingly endless reach within the state's child welfare system. She saw children like Lena not as victims, but as difficult cases that needed to be processed efficiently. Elias felt a surge of cold indignation. This woman was the personification of the systemic force that had failed Lena, and he knew he had to protect Lena from her. One afternoon, a week after Lena's arrival, the first direct threat materialized. A nondescript sedan, an official state vehicle, drove slowly past Elias's remote ranch gate. It wasn't the usual local sheriff's patrol. It was a car Elias didn't recognize. He watched it from the cover of the barn, his heart pounding. It made a second pass an hour later, lingering for a moment, its occupants obscured by tinted windows before driving away. The message was clear. They were looking for her, and they knew where to start. Elias immediately moved Lena to a hidden, makeshift shelter he had prepared deep within the wilderness of his property, a small, camouflage lean-to he had used during particularly harsh winters. He stocked it with food, water, and extra blankets. It was a safe haven, but a temporary one. He couldn't keep her there indefinitely. The pressure escalated rapidly. Ms. Thorne, a woman who operated with relentless efficiency, didn't waste time. The next day, Sheriff Brody, looking distinctly uncomfortable, paid Elias a visit. He was accompanied by a stern, unsmiling woman in a sharp business suit, Ms. Harriet Thorne herself. Brody, a man more accustomed to issuing speeding tickets than dealing with state-level child services, shifted uncomfortably on Elias's porch. "Elias," he began, his voice hesitant, "this here is Ms. Thorne from the state. We got a report about a missing child, Alina Petrova, who was living with her aunt. Apparently, she ran away." Ms. Thorne stepped forward, her eyes, cold and sharp, sweeping over Elias, assessing him with a clinical detachment that made his skin crawl. "Mr. Vance," she stated, her voice crisp and authoritative, "we have reason to believe that the child may have been seen in this vicinity. Are you harboring a minor, Mr. Vance? Such an act carries severe legal penalties, including charges of kidnapping." Elias met her gaze, his face impassive. He had rehearsed this moment, mentally preparing himself for her cold, dismissive interrogation. "I found a child in my barn, Ms. Thorne," he stated calmly, choosing his words carefully. "She was hypothermic, malnourished, and clearly traumatized. I took her in, provided her with warmth and food. I also observed signs of severe abuse, including rope marks and bruising consistent with a beating. She told me she was abandoned and threatened by her aunt and her aunt's boyfriend." Thorne's expression didn't change, but a flicker of irritation crossed her eyes. She clearly didn't appreciate Elias challenging her narrative. "Mr. Vance, your observations are irrelevant. You're not a certified social worker, nor are you authorized to take a child from the custody of their legal guardian. Regardless of her circumstances, Lena Petrova is a ward of the state. She must be returned to our custody immediately. Any delay will be seen as obstruction of justice." "She was abandoned, Ms. Thorne, not just ran away," Elias countered, his voice firm. "And I don't believe sending her back to a system that puts children in abusive homes, or allows them to be abused, is in her best interest." "Where's she now?" Thorne demanded, her voice rising. Elias remained calm. "I took her to a safe place. A place where she won't be abused. A place where she is warm and fed. And I informed her of her rights." This was a bluff. He hadn't informed her of her rights, but he intended to. "Mr. Vance, this is your last warning. Surrender the child, or we will return with a warrant and search your entire property. And if we find her, you will face the full weight of the law." The threat was clear, unequivocal. Elias knew he had to buy time. He had to act. He had to find a true solution, a way to permanently secure Lena's safety, beyond the reach of Ms. Thorne and the broken system she represented. His life and Lena's future depended on it. The confrontation with Ms. Thorne left Elias with a chilling certainty. He had to get Lena out of her reach permanently. Thorne was relentless, her cold, bureaucratic efficiency, a force Elias felt ill-equipped to combat alone. He spent the next few days in a desperate race against time. He knew Thorne would be back, and next time, She would have a warrant and a full search team. He visited Lena in her hidden lean-to, bringing her supplies, reassuring her that she was safe, even as the danger grew more palpable. He knew he couldn't keep her hidden on his ranch indefinitely. It was too risky for both of them. He sat by the fire late into the nights, poring over old maps, trying to find a solution, a safe haven. He remembered whispers from years ago, an old tale from Eleanor, about a distant community, a hidden enclave of fiercely independent people who lived deep in the mountains, almost completely off the grid. They were known for their self-sufficiency, their distrust of outsiders, and their absolute refusal to adhere to conventional laws when it came to their own. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was the only option Elias could conceive that might offer Lena true, permanent sanctuary. The community was rumored to be led by an elder, a wise woman known only as the Weaver, who protected her people with fierce loyalty. This community had a reputation for taking in the lost, the abandoned, those who sought refuge from a world that had rejected them. He would take Lena there. He would trust that these people, who lived by their own code, would understand her plight and offer her protection. It would be a dangerous journey, far into the wild, untamed mountains, a trek Elias hadn't made in decades. He gathered supplies, a sturdy pack, dried meat, water, a compass, and his old rifle. He prepared Buck for the long journey, saddling him with extra provisions. Lena understood the gravity of the situation. Her young eyes, though still reflecting a deep weariness, held a newfound resilience. She knew Elias was risking everything for her. She expressed her fear, not for herself, but for him, for the legal trouble he could face. "I don't want you to lose your home, Elias," she whispered, her voice trembling. Elias looked at her, his gaze firm. "You are more important than any home, Lena. We'll be safe. Both of us." The lie tasted bitter on his tongue. He knew the risk he was taking, but he had made a promise to her, a promise unspoken but deeply felt, and he would see it through. The farewell was tearful and silent. Lena clung to Rusty, burying her face in his fur, as Elias prepared to leave. The old dog whined, sensing the coming separation, the profound journey that was about to begin. Elias gave him a final, comforting pat, then turned to Lena. "You'll be okay, girl," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll be back for you. I promise." He handed her a small, hand-carved wooden horse, a simple toy he had found years ago, polished smooth by time. "Keep this," he said. "It's for luck, and so you remember me." Lena clutched the horse to her chest, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and quiet determination. "I will," she whispered. Elias mounted Buck, the old horse a sturdy, reliable presence beneath him. He took one last look at his cabin, the familiar sanctuary that had been his world for so long. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that when he returned, if he returned, the peace he had found here would be irrevocably shattered, and perhaps the ranch itself would be gone. The journey into the mountains was arduous, a grueling test of Elias's physical and mental endurance. He rode for days, pushing himself and Buck to their limits, navigating treacherous trails, crossing icy streams, and battling the relentless wind and the biting cold. He ate sparingly, slept little, his senses constantly alert for danger, for any sign of Thorn's agents, or the harsh realities of the wilderness. He spoke to Lena in quiet, reassuring tones, telling her stories of the ranch, of Eleanor, of the land, trying to paint a picture of warmth and safety that belied their desperate situation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached their destination. Hidden deep within a remote valley, almost entirely obscured by thick forest and imposing rock formations, was the hidden community. It was a small, self-sufficient village of log cabins and rough-hewn shelters, nestled beside a pristine mountain lake. Smoke curled from stone chimneys, and the faint sounds of life, children's laughter, the distant ring of an axe, drifted on the crisp mountain air. Elias approached cautiously, his rifle held loosely in his hands, ready for any challenge. A lone figure emerged from a cabin, an older woman, her face weathered by sun and wind, her eyes, sharp and knowing, fixed on him. This was the weaver. She offered no smile, no immediate welcome, just a profound, unblinking gaze that seemed to peel back the layers of his soul, seeing the truth of his desperate quest. Elias dismounted, helping Lena slide to the ground. He looked at the weaver, then at Lena, and finally he spoke, his voice raw with exhaustion and a desperate plea. "I have brought a child," he said, his voice low, filled with a gravity that transcended mere words. "A child who needs sanctuary from a world that has discarded her, from a system that would crush her spirit. I ask for your protection for her." The weaver's eyes, ancient and wise, held his gaze for a long moment, assessing, judging. Elias waited, his fate and Lena's hanging in the balance, suspended in the crisp mountain air. He had risked everything. Now he could only hope that his desperate gamble had paid off, that this remote, hidden community would offer Lena the safety and the future she deserved. The weaver's silence was a heavy, palpable thing, a test of Elias's sincerity. Her eyes, ancient and wise, seemed to pierce through his worn exterior, probing his soul for truth and integrity. Lena, sensing the gravity of the moment, clung to his hand, her small body trembling slightly. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the weaver gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. Her gaze, though still stern, held a flicker of something akin to understanding, perhaps even compassion. "Enter, stranger," she said, her voice a low, resonant murmur, like wind through mountain caves. "And bring the child. We will hear your story." And hers. The words were a lifeline. Elias felt a wave of profound relief wash over him, so intense it almost buckled his knees. He led Lena into the heart of the hidden community. The villagers, their faces a mixture of curiosity and stoic reserve, watched them pass. There were no welcoming smiles, no immediate gestures of warmth, but there was also no hostility, just a quiet, watchful acceptance. They were, Elias realized, a people who understood hardship and the need for sanctuary. Inside the weaver's cabin, which served as the community's central lodge, Elias recounted Lena's story, leaving nothing out. The cruel aunt, the abuse, the abandonment, the discovery in his barn, the relentless pursuit by Ms. Thorne, and the chilling impersonality of the state system. Lena, though quiet, confirmed his words with a steady gaze and the occasional nod. The weaver listened, her expression unreadable, her eyes fixed on Elias, then on Lena, absorbing every word, every nuance. When he finished, there was a long, thoughtful silence. "The system," the weaver finally said, her voice filled with a weary wisdom. "It sees children as burdens, as numbers. It does not see their spirit. Here we see the spirit. We see the potential." She turned to Lena, her gaze softening. "Child, you have suffered, but you are strong. You are safe here. We will teach you our ways, our knowledge of the land, our crafts. You will learn to heal. You will learn to thrive." Lena's eyes, wide with a mixture of relief and a hesitant hope, looked from the weaver to Elias, then back again. A silent promise was exchanged. Elias knew she was safe. His mission was complete. The farewell was heartfelt, simple. Lena, her face now calm and resolute, hugged Elias tightly. "I will never forget you, Elias," she whispered, her voice surprisingly strong. "You saved me. I promise, one day I will pay you back. I will find a way." Elias held her close, his eyes burning with unshed tears. "You just live, Lena," he murmured. "Live and be happy. That's all the payment I need." He watched her disappear into the embrace of the weaver and the women of the community, her small figure swallowed by the warmth of their new sanctuary. Then, with a heavy heart but a sense of profound purpose, he turned and began the long, solitary journey back to his ranch, to the life he had risked everything to save. The ride back was different. The mountains, once a desperate obstacle, now felt like a benevolent guardian, holding Lena safe within their ancient embrace. Elias's ranch, when he finally saw it, seemed smaller, emptier. The sense of profound loneliness, which had been pushed aside by his protective mission, returned, but it was tinged with a new kind of quiet satisfaction. He had done what was right. He had saved a life. But his quiet triumph was short-lived. Ms. Thorne, relentless and utterly humorless, had indeed returned to his ranch with a full warrant. She had searched his cabin, his barn, every nook and cranny of his property, her cold eyes missing nothing. The moment Elias rode back into his yard, exhausted but resolute, she was waiting. She stood on his porch, flanked by Sheriff Brody and two grim-faced deputies, a thin smile of triumph on her lips. "Mr. Vance," she stated, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction, "you have committed a federal offense. You have harbored a minor, obstructed justice, and hindered a state investigation. Your little charity project has just cost you everything." She held up a thick stack of papers. "We have obtained a court order. Your ranch, Mr. Vance, is being seized by the state. You're in violation of multiple statutes, and you will be charged." The words hit Elias like a physical blow. His sanctuary, his legacy, his only connection to Eleanor, all of it was about to be stripped away. He had saved Lena, but at what cost? He looked at the storm gathering on Thorne's face, at the grim faces of the deputies, and felt a chilling certainty. His quiet act of kindness had indeed cost him everything. The fight had only just begun, and the stakes had just escalated to an unbearable degree. He had won the battle for Lena's immediate safety, but he was losing the war for his own future. He was a solitary figure, facing the full, relentless force of a system that cared nothing for his quiet courage, only for its own inflexible rules and cold, impersonal justice. The days that followed were a blur of bureaucratic cruelty. Ms. Harriet Thorne, a woman consumed by her own rigid sense of order and the unwavering conviction of her own righteousness, moved with ruthless efficiency. Elias's ranch, his ancestral home, was declared state property. His cattle were impounded, his equipment cataloged, and his personal belongings boxed up. He was allowed to retrieve only a few essentials. Sheriff Brody, looking increasingly uncomfortable, carried out the orders, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by strained professionalism. He tried to avoid Elias's gaze, but Elias met it steadily, his own eyes holding a quiet, wounded dignity that spoke volumes. The legal charges were piled high: obstruction of justice, child endangerment, interfering with a state investigation. Elias was processed, fingerprinted, and released on a surprisingly high bail, paid for by an anonymous benefactor, a detail that puzzled him, but offered a temporary reprieve. He suspected it was the Weavers doing a silent act of reciprocity from the hidden community. He was given a date for a preliminary hearing, a formality before the full weight of the state's legal machinery would descend upon him. He knew he didn't stand a chance. He had no money for a lawyer, no influence, no allies in this legal battle. He was just an old rancher, alone against a system that was designed to crush individuals like him. His ranch, once a symbol of his proud independence, now stood empty, a stark monument to his impending ruin. He had to live in a small, cheap motel room in Havenwood, his days filled with a desperate, hopeless search for legal aid, his nights haunted by memories of Eleanor, of Lena, of the life he had lost. Mr. Silas Sterling, a sleek, predatory land developer from the city, quickly entered the picture. He was a man with a politician's smile and a shark's eyes, dressed in expensive suits, always accompanied by equally sharp-suited lawyers. He appeared at town hall meetings, exuding an air of oily confidence, declaring his interest in Elias's seized land. He spoke of revitalizing the economy, of creating opportunity, and of building a grand, sprawling resort on the very land Elias had painstakingly worked for decades. He saw Elias's ranch not as a home, but as a blank canvas for his ambition, a piece of prime real estate ripe for exploitation. Sterling's influence in Havenwood seemed to permeate every level of local government. He was often seen deep in conversation with Mayor Thompson, the same Mayor Thompson who controlled the local bank where Elias had his now foreclosed loan. The circles of power, Elias realized, were small and interconnected, and they were all aligned against him. He saw the systematic nature of his downfall. It wasn't just bad luck, it was a calculated takeover, facilitated by Ms. Thorne's zealous pursuit of Lena. The ranch, Elias knew, was to be sold at a public auction, a legal formality designed to legitimize its seizure. Sterling would be the sole bidder, acquiring it for a fraction of its true value. Elias felt a profound sense of injustice, a burning indignation that fueled his weary spirit. He had done nothing but try to help a child, and for that, he was losing everything. The emotional toll was immense. He was a man who had always prided himself on his self-sufficiency, his ability to handle whatever life threw at him. Now, he was helpless, stripped bare, facing a future of utter destitution. The days crawled by, each one bringing him closer to the inevitable auction. He made a few desperate, futile phone calls, trying to find someone, anyone, who would listen, who would believe his story, but the doors of the legal system remained firmly shut. He was just a small, insignificant man against a powerful, corrupt machine. The night before the auction, Elias lay awake in his sterile motel room, staring at the peeling wallpaper. He had lost everything. His ranch, his home, his connection to Eleanor. All gone. He closed his eyes, picturing Lena's face, her quiet strength, her promise to him. "I promise, one day, I will pay you back." It was a child's promise, a desperate, loving gesture, and he had long since dismissed it as the beautiful fantasy of a traumatized girl. He knew he would never see her again. His defeat felt absolute, final. He was just an old man, adrift in a world that no longer had a place for him. He rose with the dawn, his heart heavy, ready to witness the final, humiliating act of his undoing. The morning of the auction dawned with a crisp, indifferent clarity. The sun, a harsh yellow disk in a cloudless sky, cast long, accusatory shadows across the dusty main street of Havenwood. Elias walked to the town square, his steps heavy, his posture, usually ramrod straight, now subtly slumped under the crushing weight of impending loss. He was dressed in his cleanest, but still worn, ranch clothes, a silent defiance against the tailored suits of those who would profit from his ruin. The town square was a small, dusty patch of cracked concrete, dominated by an old, weather-beaten gazebo. A small crowd had gathered, a mixture of curious townsfolk, a few local businessmen, and the core group of Sterling's associates, their faces radiating a smug anticipation. Mr. Silas Sterling, impeccably dressed in a custom-tailored suit that gleamed in the sunlight, stood near the gazebo, his arms crossed, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. He was flanked by his legal team, a phalanx of sharp-suited lawyers whose expressions were as cold and calculating as his own. Mayor Thompson, looking particularly unctuous, hovered nearby, clearly basking in Sterling's reflected power. Ms. Harriet Thorne, in her usual crisp business attire, stood a little apart, her face a mask of stern, professional triumph. She offered Elias a single, dismissive glance, a silent confirmation that her agenda was now complete, her problem solved. Elias saw Sheriff Brody on the fringes of the crowd, avoiding his gaze, his discomfort palpable. The auctioneer, a portly man with a booming voice, stood at the gazebo, ready to begin the proceedings. He held a wooden gavel, a symbol of finality that would soon seal Elias's fate. The scene was a public spectacle of Elias's defeat, a carefully orchestrated humiliation designed to send a clear message. Defy the powerful, and you lose everything. Elias stood alone, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on the vast, empty expanse of his ranch land, visible in the distance beyond the town square. It was a beautiful, unforgiving land, etched with the history of his family, of Eleanor. To lose it, to have it turned into a garish resort, was a desecration. The auctioneer cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the hushed murmurs of the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today for the public auction of the Vance homestead, for 1,000 acres, including all improvements, as per state decree. We will start the bidding at a reasonable market value. considering the property's potential for. He droned on, spouting the usual bureaucratic jargon, the words blurring into an indistinct hum in Elias's ears. He was numb, resigned. He had fought, but he had lost. The auction began. Sterling's lawyers immediately placed a ridiculously low bid, a calculated insult, designed to stifle any other potential buyers and make it clear that the land was already theirs. Other bidders, if there were any, remained silent, intimidated by Sterling's reputation and the obvious manipulation of the process. The auctioneer, his gaze fixed on Sterling, began the rapid-fire chant, his voice rising in tempo, urging non-existent bids. Going once, going twice, the gavel was raised, poised to fall, to deliver the final, crushing blow. Elias closed his eyes, bracing himself for the sound that would mark the end of his world. He heard the collective intake of breath from the crowd, the anticipation, the morbid curiosity. This was it. The silence stretched, tense, and agonizing. But the gavel never fell. Just as the auctioneer's hand was about to descend, a sound, utterly alien to the quiet, rural landscape, cut through the air. It was a low, powerful hum, growing rapidly into a distinctive, high-pitched whine that reverberated through the very ground. The crowd murmured, looking up, confused. Sterling's face, moments before etched with smug triumph, twisted into a frown of irritation. The auctioneer paused, his gavel suspended in midair. The sound grew louder, closer, the unmistakable roar of jet engines, descending rapidly. It wasn't a commercial plane. It was too low, too fast, too sleek. Everyone in the town square looked up, their faces a mixture of confusion and awe. A flash of brilliant white and silver streaked across the clear blue sky, descending rapidly towards the distant edge of Elias's ranch. A private jet. Not just any private jet, but a large, luxurious executive aircraft, its wings glinting in the sunlight. It banked sharply, gracefully, its roar momentarily deafening, before leveling off and making a perfect, impossibly smooth landing on the unused, far pasture of Elias's property. A pasture Elias himself had always considered too uneven for anything larger than a small crop duster. The ground trembled. The crowd stared, utterly bewildered. Sterling's face was a mask of furious disbelief, his plans abruptly, dramatically interrupted. Ms. Thorne frowned, her composure briefly ruffled. Elias, his eyes wide, felt a jolt go through him. A private jet, landing on his land. A faint, almost forgotten promise echoed in his mind. A child's whisper from long ago. I promise, one day, I will pay you back. I will find a way. His heart, long dormant, began to hammer against his ribs with a new, terrifying, yet utterly exhilarating rhythm. The end was not the end. It was the beginning of something entirely unexpected. The private jet sat on Elias's distant pasture, a gleaming, impossible jewel against the rustic backdrop of his ranch, its engines winding down to a soft hum. The crowd in the town square was mesmerized, their eyes fixed on the distant aircraft, their whispers a confused murmur. Sterling's face, initially a mask of irritation, now contorted into one of furious indignation. What is the meaning of this interruption? He boomed, his voice echoing across the square. Auctioneer, continue. This is an official proceeding. But the auctioneer, along with everyone else, was too stunned to move. As they watched, a ramp slowly extended from the jet's underbelly, and a sleek, black limousine, the kind usually seen in metropolitan centers, rolled smoothly down it. It was followed by two equally luxurious black SUVs. The convoy then accelerated, leaving a trail of dust, speeding across the uneven terrain of the ranch towards the town square. Their arrival was a dramatic, perfectly timed entrance, executed with a precision that hinted at immense resources and undeniable purpose. The limousine, gleaming under the bright sun, pulled directly into the town square, coming to a silent, elegant stop just meters from the gazebo. The two SUVs flanked it, their tinted windows reflecting the bewildered faces of the crowd. Sterling, His jaw clenched, watched with a mixture of fury and growing apprehension. He recognized the unmistakable aura of power, but it was a power he hadn't accounted for, a variable he hadn't controlled. The driver of the limousine, a burly man in a sharp suit, emerged and moved to the rear passenger door. He opened it with a fluid, deferential motion. And then she stepped out. The crowd gasped. Sterling's eyes widened, his face paling as he recognized her. Elias's breath caught in his throat. It was Lena, not the frightened, emaciated child he had found in his barn. This was a woman. She was tall and poised, radiating an aura of quiet confidence that filled the square, eclipsing even Sterling's arrogant presence. Her dark, tangled hair was now meticulously styled, flowing around her shoulders like a silken waterfall. Her threadbare, oversized clothes were replaced by a tailored suit of exquisite cut and fabric, a deep, rich blue that perfectly matched the unwavering clarity in her eyes. Her face, no longer thin and drawn, was strong and beautiful, etched with the wisdom of a life lived far beyond the confines of Havenwood. She carried herself with an unmistakable air of power, not the ostentatious power of wealth, but the quiet, undeniable power of someone who had earned their place in the world, someone who commanded respect without demanding it. She scanned the crowd, her gaze sweeping over the astonished faces of the townsfolk, past the stunned figure of Ms. Thorne, past the quivering Mayor Thompson, until her eyes, those same piercing blue eyes, met Elias's. A profound, unspeakable wave of emotion passed between them. Gratitude, recognition, a fierce, unbreakable bond forged in kindness and shared adversity. A deep, loving smile touched her lips, a radiant warmth that belied the cool exterior of her powerful presence. She then turned her gaze, cold and unyielding, to Silas Sterling. He visibly flinched under her scrutiny, all his bluster draining from him. "Mr. Sterling," Lena said, her voice clear and strong, carrying across the silent square, echoing with a resonance that demanded attention. It was the voice of authority, tempered by an underlying current of righteous indignation. "I believe you were attempting to purchase this property?" Sterling stammered, his eyes darting nervously. Who are you? This is a private auction." "My name," Lena replied, her voice filled with a quiet, devastating power, "is Lena Petrova. And this property, Mr. Sterling, belongs to Mr. Elias Vance, a man who saved my life when I was a lost, abused child. A man who, unlike you, embodies the true spirit of human decency. And I am here to ensure that he does not lose his home, and that you do not profit from your greed and your complicity in a system that preyed on the vulnerable." She then turned to the auctioneer, her eyes blazing with an unyielding determination. "Auctioneer, I have a bid. A final bid. For the Elias Vance Ranch." The auctioneer, still in shock, looked at Sterling, then back at Lena, utterly bewildered. "Ma'am, the current bid is—" "My bid," Lena interrupted, her voice ringing with absolute certainty, "is $25 million. A collective gasp swept through the square. $25 million. The amount was so astronomical, so utterly beyond anything imaginable in Havenwood, that it seemed to suck all the air out of the world. Sterling's face was a mask of incredulous horror. Miss Thorne looked like she might faint. Mayor Thompson stared, his mouth agape. Lena's return was not just a twist of fate. It was a climactic, decisive intervention, a powerful act of vindication and a righteous reckoning, delivered with a grace and power that transcended all expectations. Elias, watching her, felt tears sting his eyes, not of sorrow, but of an overwhelming, profound gratitude. His quiet act of kindness, years ago, had just returned to him 1,000-fold, delivered by the very soul he had saved. The silence that followed Lena's staggering bid was absolute, punctuated only by the distant hum of the private jet. $25 million. The figure hung in the air, a physical weight that crushed all resistance, all argument. Silas Sterling's face was a mottled mask of furious disbelief, his empire of calculated greed crumbling before his eyes. He opened his mouth, but no words came out, only a strangled gasp. He was utterly, spectacularly defeated. Miss Harriet Thorne, who had prided herself on her unyielding control, stared at Lena, her composure utterly shattered, her face pale with shock. Mayor Thompson looked like he was about to collapse. The auctioneer, his face slack with astonishment, finally found his voice, a reedy whisper. $25 million. Going once, going twice. Sold to Ms. Petrova for $25 million. The gavel crashed down, a final, resounding thud that sealed the fate of the ranch and of Sterling's nefarious plans forever. A wave of spontaneous applause erupted from the stunned townsfolk, a collective release of tension, a roar of vindication for Elias Vance, the quiet rancher who had been so unjustly targeted. Lena turned, her gaze sweeping over Sterling, Thorne, and Thompson, her eyes filled with a cold, clear judgment. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice cutting through the applause, "your plans to exploit this land, to defile its natural beauty and its history for your own profit, are now officially concluded. My legal team will be in touch to finalize the purchase. And rest assured, every aspect of your business dealings, particularly your attempts to acquire properties through coercion and your ties to local corruption, will now be subject to the most rigorous federal scrutiny." She gestured subtly to the two black SUVs that had arrived with her. From their tinted windows, several stern-faced individuals, clearly federal agents, emerged, their eyes scanning the crowd, their presence sending a chill through Sterling's remaining associates. "We have extensive evidence, Mr. Sterling," Lena continued, her voice resonating with authority, "of your network's predatory practices, including the systematic targeting of vulnerable landowners and your collaboration with corrupt officials. This land will not be developed into a resort. It will be protected." Sterling, now completely exposed, tried to flee, but he was quickly intercepted by the federal agents. His bluster had vanished, replaced by pure, desperate fear. Mayor Thompson, seeing his powerful ally taken down, stammered a pathetic excuse and tried to blend into the crowd. But Ms. Davies, Lena's legal counsel, had already moved swiftly to intercept him. "Mayor Thompson," Ms. Davies stated, her voice crisp and unforgiving, "the federal authorities will also be very interested in your involvement in these land deals and your undeniable ties to Mr. Sterling's illicit activities. I suggest you retain legal counsel immediately." Ms. Harriet Thorne, witnessing the complete unraveling of her carefully constructed authority, knew her career was over. Her callous disregard for Lena, her zealous pursuit of Elias, had led directly to this catastrophic public exposure. She looked at Lena, then at Elias, a flicker of something akin to fear and regret in her cold eyes, before she too was approached by federal agents. Justice, swift and absolute, had arrived. Lena then turned to Elias. Her eyes, which had been so sharp and cold moments before, softened, filled with a profound, unspoken love and gratitude. She walked directly to him, ignoring the stunned crowd, and took his weathered hands in hers. "Elias," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I told you I would pay you back. You taught me what kindness truly means. You showed me that there was still good in the world when I had lost all hope. This ranch, it's not just land. It's a testament to your heart, and it's yours, now and forever." Elias could only nod, tears silently streaming down his face. He pulled her into a tight embrace, a silent, powerful reunion forged across years of separation and unimaginable triumphs. The lonely rancher, who had thought he had lost everything, had found not just his home, but his family, his legacy, and the profound vindication of his quiet, unwavering kindness. In the weeks that followed, the story of Elias Vance and Lena Petrova became a national sensation. Lena, now a CEO of a booming tech company she had built from scratch, used her immense wealth and influence not just to secure Elias's ranch, but to establish a charitable foundation in his name. The Elias Vance Havenwood Foundation was dedicated to protecting vulnerable children, providing them with safe havens, and connecting them with resources and loving homes, a direct antidote to the callous system Lena had escaped. The ranch, Elias's beloved home, was transformed. While maintaining its rustic charm, it became a vibrant center for the Foundation's work, a place where children found safety, healing, and hope. Elias lived out his days there, surrounded by the quiet joy of children's laughter, no longer lonely, his heart full, his quiet dignity utterly vindicated. Lena visited often, flying in on her private jet, but always finding time to sit on the porch with Elias and Rusty, sharing stories, simply being. The bond between them, forged in a moment of desperate kindness in a barn, had defied all expectations, proving stronger than any systemic force, any personal greed, any cruel abandonment. The narrative voice comes in, full of warmth and inspiration. It is a story that reminds us that true wealth is not measured in dollars, but in the profound connections we forge, in the lives we touch, in the kindness we offer when no one is watching. Elias Vance, a man who believed his life was defined by loss, discovered that a single act of compassion could ripple through time, returning to him in a wave of unimaginable blessings. And Lena, the abandoned child, became a powerful testament to resilience, a living embodiment of the fact that from the humblest beginnings, with just one act of genuine human kindness, a person can rise to redefine destiny, turning a desolate pasture into a beacon of hope and a testament to the enduring power of a single, good heart. This story, dear friend, is a powerful lesson. Never underestimate the ripple effect of a single act of kindness. For the smallest seed of compassion can blossom into the most extraordinary of fates, changing not just a life, but an entire community, proving that love, true love, always finds a way to pay itself back tenfold.